Hello, and thank you for listening to the Armor Hour podcast on the C-Suite for Christ platform. This month's podcast is called Tax Planning with Integrity and the Ethical Ways to Mitigate Taxes in Line with Christian Values. And as I was preparing for this podcast, it seems like it'd be nice to give a quick overview of some of the major current federal tax rates. So, as of right now, the corporate income tax rate is a flat 21%, while the individual income tax rates are a progressive tax structure with the highest rate being 37%. And that is the highest rate, depends on whether you're married, filing joint, single, that sort of thing. The capital gains tax actually has a short-term rate that is taxed as ordinary income rates up to a high of 37%. And long-term capital gain rates right now, the highest rate is 20%. There's also what's called net investment income tax, which is an additional 3.8% tax on investment income if you have income over a certain threshold. And then there's also what's called the alternative minimum tax. And this is a tax that's actually calculated each time you do your personal tax returns, along with your other form, and if you pay the higher of the two. Right now, if you are subject to alternative minimum tax, the highest AMT alternative minimum tax rate is 28%. Currently, since 2017, there's no corporate AMT. And then the last one to talk about are estate and gift taxes. So these are taxes on estates once a person dies or husband and wife pass away, or when you make gifts. Right now, the highest estate tax rate is 40% on taxable estates. But as of now, there's an exemption amount, which is $12.92 million per person in 2023. So for a couple, that you can shelter up to $25.8 million. This is something we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's scheduled to change in 2026. So welcome again. This is Rusty Peterson with IAG Wealth Partners, and I'm a wealth consultant who's known for helping families plan for the best, prepare for the worst, and be a steward for their dreams. And that's a summary of where the taxes are today, but I wanted to just kind of look what could be changing, because the tax structure always changes. So I went to the White House website at whitehouse.gov and actually found a fact sheet for the president's budget for fiscal year 2024. And there were a bunch of things that stood out, but in the sake of time, there's three things that I wanted to bring up. One of them is a proposed minimum tax on billionaires that would be a 25% tax on the wealthiest 1%. The next one is an increase in the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. And then the final one is to eliminate tax subsidies for real estate transfers. And the language actually says in the proposal that the budget would save $19 billion by closing the like-kind exchange loophole for real estate. This is also commonly known as a 1031 Starker exchange, where if you sell one piece of property and you do it properly, you can defer the gain to the new property. So that is a tax tool that is used by people who own farms, people who own rental properties, business owners who own business properties, things like that. So those are some of the things that are down the road that could change. And I'd like to do now is just look at really two Bible passages that talk about paying taxes. And the first one is Luke 20:21 to 25. And this is the Pharisees talking to Jesus. Then they, the Pharisees, asked him, saying, "Teacher, we know that you say and teach rightly, and you do not show personal favoritism, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Why do you test me? Show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription does it have?" They answered and said, "Caesar's." And Jesus said to them, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And then the other passage that struck me while I was preparing for this is 1 Timothy 6:17-19, that says, "Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold of eternal life." And there's a lot of other scriptures that we could certainly talk about, but those are two, I think, really appropriate ones. So the next thing I wanted to just bring up is really talk about the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. And just looking at the definition of tax avoidance, the definition says tax avoidance is the legal planning and arrangements of one's financial affairs to minimize tax liability within the framework of the law. Versus the distinction between tax avoidance and tax evasion is that tax evasion involves illegal actions to avoid paying taxes. So we are not ever talking about that. But tax avoidance is something that is perfectly allowed within the law. So what are some of the strategies that people can use, that successful people can use to avoid taxation? Well, in the interest of time, we can't go into all of them, but the major categories are: there are annual gifts that you can make. Each person can give $17,000 a year per person to anybody they want, and that's tax-free to those who receive it. There's also the lifetime gift. Right now it's $12,920,000 per person, or $25,840,000 for a married couple. Now this is scheduled under current law to go down to approximately $6 million per person, or $12 million per couple in 2026, if it's not changed prior to that. Another area is charitable gifts, making donations to charities. And that can be as simple as donating to a church, donating to a qualified tax charity. But there's also things like charitable lead trusts, charitable remainder trusts, private foundations, donor advised funds. So there's many, many tools in that area. And then there's also gifts in trust that are kept in trust, which can actually be going on for many, many generations. So in summary, I think God tells us that we are to pay our fair share of taxes, and that tax avoidance is a strategy that can legally minimize taxation. We have a lot of tools in our tool belt. Again, we've got annual gifting, lifetime gifting, charitable giving, and gifts in trust. And a lot of times, clients will use one or more of these strategies. And this is a topic that really requires coordination from your CPA, from your attorney, from your wealth consultant, not only to create a plan, but to monitor and update your plan as your personal situation changes and the tax landscape changes. So that's the point for today, is that charitable planning is a strategy to reduce taxes over time. And it can be customized, but it takes time and the right process to do that. And please feel free to contact me if you have questions about what is in this recording or you have concerns. My direct line is 262-446-8137. My email address is rpeterson@iagwealthpartners.com. And Peterson ends in an S-O-N. My first meeting with a couple is always I call it a connection visit. It's just to learn a little bit more about you and talk about what's the potential and what's the cost of things. So thank you for your time. This is Rusty Peterson with IAG Wealth Partners and the Armor Hour. And the last thing is a message about from my compliance, and it says that securities offered through LPL Financial, a member of FINRA and SIPC, investment advice is offered through IAG Wealth Partners LLC, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Thank you again for listening to the Armor Hour, and God bless. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.